Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It's Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. It is 2:33 p.m. The session is set to go until 3:30 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast, room 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. To my left is Commissioner Gary Edwards. We also have Auditor Mary Hall, who's joining us, as well as Deputy Auditor Diana Benson. And we have Sheriff Derek Sanders, who's joining us, and County Manager Ramiro Chavez. And we're going to be discussing the sales tax ballot measure briefing. And online we have Elizabeth Petrich, who's joining us from the prosecutor's office, as well as Patrick O'Connor, the Director of Public Defense, and Heidi Thompson from prosecutors or Sheriff's Office.
Sheriff's Office.
Sheriff's.
Rob Gelder.
And Rob Gelder, our Assistant County Manager. Okay.
Ready? Yeah, thank you, commissioners. Thank you for making the time. There's a little bit of, first of all, the timelines associated with this is getting to the point of having this meeting. The objective of this meeting is to hear from the board as to how the context of this potential ballot measure will be. Depending on the feedback, on the decision the board, direction they'll provide, that you will provide me, you will see an agenda item on your July 18 Board of County Commissioners you will be approving this resolution. And that is a key date because we don't have a meeting on July 25th and we need to submit this proposition to the auditor's office in the first week in August. That is really where we are. Some other background, the board was contemplating exercising your duty options to ask the voters to support, in this case, a 0.2% of additional sales tax that is specifically related to the public safety. The public safety is very clear as outlined in the statute. And that information was provided to you a while back as to what this will do. 0.2% countywide will generate just about 14.2 million. Take those numbers, very soft. And they also, statute requires that 40% of that revenue needs to be distributed to the cities. So, and those cities will be Bucura, Lacey, Olympia, Rainier, Tenino, Tumwater, and Yale. And that is distributed based on population. So after the 40% is distributed to the cities. Okay.
The way this reads is that 1/3 of the money must be shared as follows: 60% by the county and 40% based to the cities. That's what it says. I'm reading off the proposed resolution.
Well, there's a few corrections we need to be
We need to
done.
do some corrections here.
Yeah.
So
This is a core element, and
Right.
that's different than what you're describing. You're saying 40% of the total. This says 40% of a third.
No, it's 40% of the total.
Yeah, this needs to be rewritten then.
Yep.
Just make a note.
So what it says is the 1/3 needs to be spent by the cities and public safety. They will clarify that.
That's not how that paragraph reads.
Which paragraph are you?
The second whereas from the bottom, whereas 1/3 of all money received
Oh.
must be shared between the county and city as follows.
Yeah.
60% by the county, 40% must be distributed to the cities.
So one.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 60% and 40%. But also there is a requirement, the 40% that will be distributed by the cities, 1/3 they need to spend on public safety. And then they don't have any obligations after that, regardless as to how this ballot proposition will be put in place.
So of the money that each city gets, at least 1/3 of it has to be spent on public safety.
Yeah, and
issues.
then-
The other
and-
2/3 could be spent on anything else.
General obligation, yeah.
Public
And
safety is defined by the statute.
so
And
that's,
that will depend on each of the jurisdictions. In the conversations that I've had with the mayors, we've kind of let them know that, per the statute, that's, what, and then we're not going to put any other limitations on whatever their priorities are, we don't want to get
On their part,
on their
Their
part.
we'll restrict our part.
Yeah,
We'll-
however,
we'll Be restrictive of our
yeah,
part.
whatever, how the ballot
I don't
proposition
know
is,
what copy you guys are looking at, a different one, I guess, than I am, but sheriff is spelled wrong all the way through.
yeah, well,
Here.
Needs to be corrected.
We're looking at this one.
Yeah, so I guess they're the same as my little one here too. Okay, good. I was just wondering, you got a different, I see. Okay,
Is that going to confuse the voters?
no, we don't need to outline that on the proposition. It's just a matter of distribution after the fact.
on the next page, there'll be the
Correct.
wording of the ballot.
Yeah, so it's on the back end, the obligation that we need to distribute that 40%. Does not need to be part of the ballot proposition.
On 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the 6th, whereas,
You just,
oh, what are we doing? I thought we were going over it.
let me finalize the background and then.
Go ahead. Sorry about that. Trying to get in a hurry, trying to get her done.
So the 0.2%, as I stated, it could generate countywide 14.2%. 40% of that is
14.2 million.
14.2 million. 40% of that will be distributed to the cities. That is off the top. And that is just about 5.7 million. And that 5.7 million will be distributed to the cities according to population. So in this case, you could get about 12,000, Lacey 1,060,000, no, there's 23,000 Bucota, Lacey 2.1 million, Olympia 2 million, Rainier 92,000, Penida 74,000, Tumwater 961,000, and Yelm 390,000. That's the distribution.
Very rough numbers.
Very rough numbers, that just give you an idea. So the remainder for the county on a yearly basis will be just about $8.6 million. And that is really what the revenue that could be generated by this proposed measure. The resolution, and we can work through the whereases, if I can go page 2, that is really the ask to the voters as presented to you. I mean, that's the gist of this conversation. And it reads, the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners has adopted this resolution concerning the sales and use tax pursuant RCW 82.14.450. If approved, this proposition would authorize an additional sales tax at the rate of 0.2% to be used for up to 75% in law enforcement protection and up to 25% in corresponding defense and prosecution services, should this proposition be. That is the key of this resolution. And again, this is a very draft. I want to make sure that all of you have the opportunity to review it, provide perspective. Whatever decision the board makes today, whatever revisions the board makes today, I will make sure I will incorporate those and have this resolution ready for you to take an action on July 18th.
Okay.
If the board continues to have that desire to put this in front of the voters in November.
Okay.
Does this have some of the cities already have public safety levies? Does this impact their levy at all? I know Olympia and I think Tumwater both have public safety taxes already.
Only Olympia,
Only Olympia.
and Olympia would retain, as long as we don't go to 3%, they retain with no effect.
And they've been given,
Because they couldn't double.
Right, that's what I was.
and they've been given the breakdown of the information of how much they would receive as well. I gave that to them, and so they are aware of,
What is their percentage?
1%.
They only did 0.1.
That I think that's all they can do. is
Cities only have a
0.1.
maximum of 1/10 of 1%.
Okay.
The
and
counties has up to 3/10.
Okay, but what did Robin say about if we go to 2, they're okay, but if we go to 3, they're not okay?
Yeah, the way the revenue works is that you can't double collect, if you will. There's maximum of 3% in any jurisdiction. So if we went to 3%, we would have to reduce the amount collected in Olympia by 1%. They would keep their whole 1%. The reduced amount would come to the county and then we'd share it out accordingly.
Because you couldn't double tax
Right.
the residents.
As long as we don't go to 3%, it's not terribly complicated.
Double tax is not the right term, but I
No.
understand now. Got it.
Exceeding the
You
3
can't,
tenths limit.
each jurisdiction has a, even though the city can only impose 0.1, they can collect 0.3 as long as someone else is doing it. And so our 0.2 adds to their 0.1 and they're at their cap.
We're the only ones that can add to it. We're the,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
The county, the
Yes.
counties have that option. Cities do not. The caps.
Commissioner Edwards.
Okay, we're gonna
Yep.
make corrections right now?
Yep,
Is that what we're gonna do? Okay, on the 6th, whereas, I think it'd be a little easier to understand for the voters if that said, whereas additional funding is necessary to increase, and I think it should say, the number of deputy sheriffs and additional law enforcement services to safely and efficiently manage the safety of the citizens in both the county and the city. So just kind of add a couple words for clarification there, but you know, I'm just trying to look at it from a simple perspective.
So,
Such as a matter of perspective, voters will not see this.
No, I know, but somebody,
Yeah, no,
you
no,
know,
just
I'm just trying to
clarify.
clarify.
The
Yeah.
voters will see
Only
just
see this
whatever you
little bit on the
decide.
back, right, and I've got to change for that as
so
well.
I know we're all looking at the resolution, right? And like trying to make changes, but I think there's like a couple things that we need to address. First of all, is the auditor's request, or it was just suggested that it might be, and then, so that is one piece of the things that we need to address. I also heard that there were comments that came in from the prosecutor, and so we have to hear those comments. So before we dig into the resolution and correcting little, I think we just need to address other big pieces of the sales
I
tax.
appreciate it. Any typographical changes that you like to, please send it my way and I will collect those. That will be the best approach.
So I know we've been searching for ways to fund the retrofitting and expansion of the ballot processing center, which is in desperate need. And it was discussed that this could be a possible one-time source of funding. Is that still possible the way this is written? Is this still in the plan? We recently heard from Congressman Strickland's office that they did not approve the other grant that we put in for funding for that project.
I thought we talked about this at our last meeting and I thought we said we wanted to keep it to the law enforcement component so we'd know if the public is supportive or not versus spreading it out to other areas. I don't know, I
So-
thought, didn't we have
No,
something?
we discussed
that.
that we needed to come to a decision point.
Here's
with
the,
this.
here's the decision.
And
So-
here we are,
So,
okay,
yeah, so
Yeah,
that was.
part of the discussion, but
Okay.
we hadn't really made a decision.
okay.
So that was basically why, you know, when I requested this meeting is why I asked the auditor to come to this, or, you know, I requested the auditor to come because I was like, we need to let the auditor know whether this is a way we're gonna be proceeding or not. And so that's like a decision the board needs to make. So I know that auditor has spoken with the sheriff, right? And a big part of the initial request from the board was for that communication to take place and see kind of where the sheriff kind of stood on that determination. Again, this will, you know, it's an impact to,
I guess the bottom line is, can you convince the voters to vote for more government function besides law enforcement?
My perspective on this was twofold, right? I think on one hand, it doesn't really matter what cut everyone gets if it doesn't pass. That's probably the biggest thing. We can have a debate all day long about who gets how much and where that money goes, but if it doesn't pass, everyone gets zero. The second part of this, though, was that I don't think it's going to be very difficult on my end. Right now, it's split 75-25. And kind of my perspective with this, especially because I'm probably going to be the one out there kind of on the face of this. I mean, this is almost all these lines talk about deputy sheriffs in the sheriff's office. So I'm the one who has to go out here and talk about it. But my conversation mostly, I think, that we had between myself, the auditor, and the prosecutor's office was what is done with the other 25% is not really within my scope. The 75%, that is what I'm focused on. We've already began drafting what our 75% looks like. It's very, very, very promising. I know Ramiro and I had conversations about how it's not gonna get us in the middle. It might actually get us pretty close to the middle of the the middle of the state. So my perspective on this was more neutral. It was what the board decides to do with the other 25% is up to the board. There are some arguments that this is a one-time cost, whether it's bonded, whether it's paid for immediately. And at the same time, you know, you guys can make those determinations with what is done with the other 25%. In order for me to retain the morale and the strategy that I've explained to our deputies, my only ask is that it would not come out of the 75% cut from the sheriff's office. There are some things to keep in mind with this, however. There is going to, regardless of where the money is allocated to, there are going to be significant vacancy savings within the first couple of years. Because the reality is I think right now we're projected to add 28 deputy sheriffs. I can't get 28 deputy sheriffs on, you know, in that first year. So same thing with the PA's office and even defense, right? Defense isn't going to see a huge increase in caseload because there aren't going to be more people put in jail. There's not going to be more deputies out patrolling the streets. So there's a number of things to consider there, but ultimately I defer to the Board of County Commissioners on this. I remain neutral on how they wish to proceed.
Are you saying that the 75%, whatever that is, let's just say 6 million. So if 6 million's coming your way to try to hire, we're gonna, at least in the initial year or two or whatever it is, we're gonna see a lot of that back because you won't be able to fill the spots. And that money could potentially be available for
That
auditors'
money,
needs.
nope, the
No.
way this is
No.
written,
Would
it
have to
would
go.
have to go
Yeah.
to law enforcement, that 75, that $6 million.
It's locked in.
You could not spend it any other way.
And if I were contemplating if this passes to
Special
bring all
fund.
that special fund, if we can keep track of that. Because this is, you know, if this is the direction that we're wants to, is very specific. There is no other government functions that you can fund with this.
Right.
So it will go to an ending fund balance.
Part of my concern, I mean, I've said, I think all three of us have said that, you know, we hash it out with Mary, we hash it out together, it starts to seem good, and then, you know, okay, worried. I mean, you know, part of my concern was what the sheriff said right up front, it's gotta pass. And how it would be framed, you know, to me is a big part of assessing the political chances of success. So can this be framed, and I'm looking at what, can this be framed so that it's 75% in law enforcement protection and 25% in, we wouldn't use the word corresponding, we'd say 25% in defense, prosecution services, and election security. Like, if that's the way it were framed, I'd feel quite a bit better about it because it would be crystal clear up front. 70, like kind of what the sheriff's saying about his task in marketing this to the public is right up front, 75% law enforcement, period. And then slipping in, so to speak, the auditor's security and election stuff amongst the other 25%, that's a framing I think that can work. That's a framing where when we go to the public and say, this is about public safety, I don't think we'll be accused of being, you know, disingenuous. I think we could say with a very straight face, 2 feet on the ground, this is about public safety and the sheriff deputy. If that's the way it could be cast, then I'm open-minded about it. What I don't want, and this comes back to the conversation maybe you guys weren't at, but I was just concerned that, you know, if the voters feel like we're trying to throw the kitchen sink at them, or it's not clean, and then we're not gonna know what the voters are saying when they say no, and we're not gonna get it passed, and no one's gonna get any of these resources, and I'm very concerned about being in that situation. So I'm kind of,
You may want to hear comments from the prosecutors.
So
Thank you.
before that, then I'll jump in because for me, I just want to speak about a separate fund, and I am in complete agreement that there needs to be a separate fund for that, and I would want it, right, because yeah, because whatever funding comes back, like, I don't want there to be any accusation that it's going back to the general fund and that we're using it for something else. I would want that allocation to just be into that restricted fund. So it's clear and concise and transparent to the voters that whatever funding, salary savings there are from, the first couple of years that the sheriff wasn't, able to fill all those slots or academic delays or whatever the case, that money was there and it was going to be resourced back into a public safety, whatever, there's like an initiative from the sheriff's office. I would want that to be very clear.
And no supplanting, I think.
Yeah, so that's kind of the.
That is key. No supplanting, and you treat as any other restricted fund, they will, whatever is not spent, you keep building, then the fund balance to do something.
Correct. And I would remind everyone that we are working in a building that is falling apart. So when you start talking about trying to create resources and things like that for other buildings, then again, the funding can go back into law enforcement, where people expect it to be, as opposed to into a general fund or supplanted from our.
I have to say, I kind of
have
like
to-
Ty's suggestion.
Modify this pretty
money there.
substantially if we're gonna spend it on a facility.
Yeah.
And-
No,
the thing about it, the idea though, is it's not fleshed out yet, and this is probably where the prosecutor's coming in, because then we'd have to talk about how, like, that projection of money, how much are we gonna need to get, when your thing is done, it's done, right?
Right.
And then then the money would flow, the 25% would flow 100% to prosecuting, but how is that division? There is gonna be some workload on the like fleshing that out, how we would actually use the resource framed in that manner should be clear. We should, have that discussion.
How about a perpetual funding source, because it sounds like it might be, and then as the time, we use that to fund that capital construction that Mary needs,
So
pay it off.
ours is really a one-time expense, and I don't think I think it'd be easy to sell to the public. I mean, we are considered critical infrastructure, right up there with the nuclear power plants. We've got, across the states, Snohomish County is building a new facility. Kitsap County is moving into a facility with emergency management. We've been in the same footprint since 1985, when we had 135,000 registered voters. It's not safe anymore. And I really think that we could sell this. I mean, it is election security. I mean, if we can't keep our workers safe, be in an environment where we know that we can operate safe elections, I don't know what we do, and I don't know where else we get the money. I mean, we did have the even year funding pass, where we now bring in anywhere from $750,000 to $1 million every even year, because the state now pays their share. So that's a funding source also that could go towards this, but it is a one-time expense. And after that, we're pretty self-sustainable because we bill all of our expenses to the jurisdictions.
I do want to comment on Mary's comment that everybody looks at that as essential service, your election services. I think everybody involved in elections looks at it that way. I don't know if the public looks at it that way. And the reason I say that is the federal folks nor the state were willing to step in and help on anything on elections.
Actually, that's not true.
Oh,
We
okay.
get $80,000 per year from the state for security.
Well, yeah,
We
but I
have
mean,
a
nothing
couple-
substantial. I mean, as far as to address it.
Couple $100,000, but again, it can't be used on infrastructure. It's just security.
Yeah.
Right now, what we need is infrastructure to ensure security.
Yep, but I'm just saying it's not as cut and dried with the public. I just don't think the public is there the same as we're gonna put deputy sheriffs on the street. It's a completely different ball.
It's gotten a little bit politicized from.
What's that?
It's gotten politicized at the federal level.
Yeah,
and it's
yeah, for
spilled
sure.
down to
That's
us.
what I'm saying. I mean, I'm just, the reality of it is that that's where it's at, so.
So let's hear from the prosecutor's office.
Thank you, Commissioners. John Thunheim, we're both over here at the WAPA conference, and he was not able to pull out of his elected meetings today. So he asked me to share a few comments with you about the proposed split of the money. His original understanding was that the 75% split was to the sheriff and 25% was to the prosecutor's office. He was not aware that, or did not believe that defense would be part of that 25% allocation. So it came as a surprise to him when he saw that that was part of the discussion. He doesn't even know about the election security piece of it, so I'm not sure what his position on that is. But John would not, he feels like, so he's surprised by that. He doesn't feel like he can support the ballot measure if the money's going to be going to defense. And he has several reasons for that. But I just want to give you the highlights. And then he doesn't feel like the Deputy Prosecuting Attorneys Association will be supporting the ballot measure. So it's because when obviously public safety, if the sheriff's going to be getting more money, there's going to be more referrals for prosecution. And then there's defense services as well. But the work in the prosecutor's office is more than that because they have to bring the charges and make the case at a very high burden. So his concern, he would like defense to have some money, but he doesn't want that. He's concerned about having them be part of that share. So I just wanted to give you the highlights of his concern. And he would be happy to meet with you and discuss, answer any questions about his concerns when he can.
Does anyone want to tackle it before I do?
I just say, I'm very surprised that he's surprised because we have never had a conversation about this and we've had many that didn't include prosecutor and public defense. The question was whether it would extend any further toward other elements of the court system, and we've dialed it back to not include that. But to think that public defense wouldn't at least be included is, I don't know, a little bit shocking to me.
As I have approached the sheriff on this idea, I believe I have been consistent on the 75 and 25 prosecution and defense. That's how I approach the prosecutor as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was that's always been the conversation that we've had. If we were, first, my whole proposal was like, well, let's just go 100% on the sheriffs and not include prosecutor and public defense. Let's not water it down. Let's just directly law enforcement, right? And then in conversations that we had, it was just like, okay, well then let's include the prosecutor and public defense. It was never just the prosecutor ever in the conversations that we've had. It was always the prosecutor and public defense because those are the two office and department who has to review all of the caseload that comes through. I mean,
And maybe a prosecutor gets 90% of that 25% because the board will consider, we're not saying equal shares. We're just saying that, say that there's zero public defense and 100%, that's ridiculous.
So for me, I mean, if the prosecutor is not willing to support this, I mean, we can go back to the original idea and just go with, trying to fund law enforcement and public defense and the auditors. So I mean, we can go that, if the prosecutor is not willing to support it, then we can go another avenue, right? I
think in the conversation that I had with you early on, right, is obviously a lot of this is probably gonna fall on my shoulders, and rightfully so, right? I'm vying for 75% of the funding. I should be doing at least 75% of the work to campaign and push for this initiative. But I also don't want to assist in a freeloading game where people who are not assisting in the campaign and don't support it receive funding from it. So I guess my counter to that, and again, I'm also a little surprised to hear that there's just gonna be no support from the prosecutor whatsoever. Would be if they do not support the initiative, then they shouldn't receive funding for it. I mean, that would just be my plain assessment of that. Right? I mean,
You know, there is one other way that we can look at this. If we went 100% for the law enforcement component, that, although we're not allowed to supplant, it does ease up our burden on both the auditor and prosecutor and defense, as far as not having to dig into current expenses much, maybe.
well, I would still want to include public defense because at the end of the day, public defense is still a department. The commissioners are responsible for the departments, and therefore, I feel like when this was a conversation I had with the sheriff, right? Like, I will be right out there just as, as much as I can possibly be to try, and I know my seatmates will be too for this. So in a way, I feel not almost responsible, but I'm carrying that burden from the public defense side and advocating for that piece of it. And so, and there is a burden in public defense. So for me, I'm like, I would still want to support, even if it's a smaller percentage for public defense to receive that. Not sure if it would be like the 25 or maybe 15, not sure on that, but if the prosecutor is not willing, I just don't see why we should include him, and I agree with the sheriff.
Aside from, the conversation you still need to have on the others, Ballot processing center. And this is just my humble perspective from the voter's point of view. It seems to be something straightforward. More law enforcement addresses the crime, is going to generate more arrests, right? Arrest results on prosecution, and we are responsible to defend those individuals because that's constitutional mandate that we have. We don't have an option. And I think the voters will understand those three elements of additional public safety, because it's really what we need to address is the lack of sheriff deputies that we have, the response time, that we don't have adequate response time, and really is to address the rising crime in the county.
They always say justice delayed is justice denied, right? And if you don't have defense lawyers, case is gonna get continued, trials are gonna take forever, and the system doesn't work. So it's not enhancing, I mean, unless you think that all those additional deputies are gonna generate zero new actual court prosecutions, which is ridiculous, then there has to be an inclusion. I don't even understand the argument.
I just want to clarify too, I fully support that quarter going to prosecution and defense. I just don't support, if defense came out and said, we're opposing it, well, then why would they get the funding? You know what I mean? It's just, I fully support though that we don't operate in a vacuum in law enforcement, and that there needs to be that additional funding for the courts.
The problem is though, we have to, I understand the concept of what you're saying, but the reality is we still have to pay for what they do. Like it's not like a voluntary program. So if we don't allocate any money to the prosecutor and you guys generate all kinds of new cases, like prosecutor's just gonna need funding out of the general fund we can't play that game, is what I'm saying, I guess, unfortunately.
Well,
How about
but then again, I will go back, coming back to this conversation on whenever there's a request from the prosecutor's office, is he decided that, he didn't want to participate in this. And that was his choice to not advocate to the voters on why his office needed a certain percentage of this. I mean, he is his own elected official, so that responsibility and that burden also falls on his office.
How about I'm
And
trying to make it simple. Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
Elizabeth is
Oh.
raising her hand.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify, I was rereading John's notes and I misspoke. He did not say he would not support the measure. He was just trying to share his concerns. So I didn't mean to say that, and I feel very badly that that's the message I sent. He was having concerns about pulling the fence in. He was having concerns that perhaps the Criminal Deputy Association wouldn't support the ballot. He didn't, I misinterpreted when I said he didn't support it, that he would not support it. And he also is wanting to find a way to have funding for defense as well. He just would like to find it in a different way than this particular percentage. So I just wanted to put that on the record that he did not say.
Could we think about, as we think about options, could we make it as simple as possible? And I'm gonna use 80% just because I thought we were still having a situation here. At least 80% of the funding raised will go to hire new deputy sheriffs without any supplanting of existing funds or something like that. And leave us the option of 20% to, without designating so much is gonna go to the auditor for voter security, so much is gonna go to defense, so much is gonna go to the prosecutor. We can work that out. I think the public would maybe accept that. I don't know that, but if that was the push that we were taking, I'm saying 80% because I thought they'd accept that better than 75. But anyway, but it could be 75 and not try to divide it up amongst all parties. Although I did like what you said, if we could make that work. But anyway.
Well, I mean, just if I could, on Commissioner Edwards' point, do we have that flexibility to, like, what are the public safety?
You can write this ballot measures as tight as you want. The only concern that I have about your proposal is at 80% just to hire new sheriff deputies.
Can't write that.
That will be it. The sheriff will not be able to use for
No
any
patrol
other.
cars or anything.
No, for any other
And
programs that he
Some
will
of the
not
things
do.
that we had in here, right, we had 25 deputies, but then we also had 3 sergeants, 2 civil deputies, 4 detectives, a legal assistant, a financial assistant to, and then, so we have a lot of things in there.
The tighter that you put in this, the more difficult it will be to
Okay,
spend.
good.
And
Just a concept.
that's what they put some thoughts on this law enforcement protection. It really is,
I like that phraseology.
it is really that intended. If I, sorry.
Yeah, no. Hey, I'm talking about a concept here. I'm not talking about final verbiage. I'm just trying to get something through. But I thought maybe the prosecutor wasn't gonna be with us, but maybe if he is with it, it's a little different ballgame here.
My point is, I just wanna make sure I've got this. If we wanted to do the election piece, that fits within the potential use of this?
Absolutely. Only following state law, 1/3 of the revenue must be spent on public safety, which is very broad. And
Okay.
you could spend 2/3 on other things. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying what
Okay,
what is
but
possible.
we have that flexibility. We have the flexibility to do what
Yeah.
Commissioner Edwards said if we wanted
You-
to,
if
and
you
not even
wanted to get
say,
it that
not even say
tight.
what we're gonna do with 25% of it.
That is true. That is
And
absolutely
maybe that solves
true.
everybody's problem.
If we
because-
go with Commissioner Edwards' suggestion, I would be more inclined with the 80% and then 20% flexibility. I like those numbers, 80 and 20, because then
I'm just trying to
if we're
make
not
it,
gonna dictate specifically the other 20 or 25, like I just feel,
But remember, if we're actually trying to get the auditor building paid for and deal with whatever corresponding prosecutor and public defense needs we have, like, I don't know that we
well,
want.
we don't even know if the prosecutor is on board with
Well,
this, like, you know?
But I think the ballot measure needs to be specific, at least intended on the 25%.
So we could
Doesn't-
just,
So
Patrick,
unless you
I
put
see
general
Patrick's
government.
hand up.
Doesn't need to say anything. I think that
Let me
you,
get Patrick and then we'll go. Patrick?
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll just be very brief. I support the initiative. I had one conversation with Romero. He gave me the overview. I haven't had any further conversations or meetings about the initiative, but I do support it. But I do support it, understanding that there are going to be downstream impacts and costs associated with it, whatever distribution the commission sees fit to distribute to the sheriff's office. So I know this has been a recent conversation we've had on other topics, but there will be downstream expenses to prosecution and defense. It's just a matter of how the commissioners would like to pay for those downstream expenses.
And needed equipment.
Yes.
So it could be the simple is just leave it up to 75% for law enforcement protection and be silent on the rest.
Yes.
But I don't know how that is, because the voters will be wondering, what are you going to do with 25%?
That is the downside
So,
of that
and
is the.
so that
you
is-
leave it way open to play
Talking
out.
about election security.
And I really think that, you know, you've got this population out there, and I hear you, Commissioner Edwards, of this group over here is going to be supporting that wholeheartedly. But I would bet that those voters that aren't really fond of this would be very fond to support democracy and making sure that we have a safe, secure environment
I
to
agree.
conduct elections. So I think to marry those two would make this ballot measure that much more successful.
Yeah, I'm not for squeezing you out if we have a
Oh,
way to do it.
I understand, but
No,
I'm
I
just
see what you're saying.
Right.
You're making the same argument as to why I wanted to kind of throw public defense in there explicitly from the beginning.
I liked your first statement, to be honest with you. But
25% in corresponding defense, prosecution services, and election security.
Yeah,
something like that,
that's,
yeah.
I was in agreement with that before,
Yeah.
the prosecutor, I heard the prosecutor's office comments, so.
And that helps Mary rally her
Right.
troops,
And I will
so
be
to
out
speak.
there.
Yeah, I just had some concern with the mystery meat, right?
About what?
25%, the mystery meat, right? The 25% is a large chunk of money to say, don't bother with
Don't
what
worry
we're gonna
about
do.
it.
Don't worry about what we're doing
Trust
with
us.
this. Which
So
is why
you-
we're also trying, and I know this is probably for maybe a later conversation, but like kind of with this, right? We need to make sure that our language for this is a little vague as far as like, yes, we're gonna have our list of everything we're going to provide. But you know, one of the things in here that we're trying to start up is an aviation unit to reduce pursuits and help with search and rescue and all these other things. So I don't wanna say, you know, we're just gonna put more deputies on the road. Now granted, it's only $150,000, but I don't want to limit ourselves from what we're able to do with this money, and the services that we're able to provide to the county.
Yeah.
So.
And I think the language is broad enough to allow to do that. So what I'm hearing is, let me read this. Okay. Thurston County Board of County Commissioners has adopted resolution blah, blah, blah concerning the sales and use tax pursuant to RCW 42.14.450. If approved, this proposition would authorize an additional sale and use tax at a rate of 0.2% to be used up to 75% in law enforcement protection and up to 25% in corresponding defense,
Don't say
prosecution,
corresponding.
and up to 25% in public defense, prosecution services, and election security.
Say that, start at 25% again, read it again.
And up to 25% for public defense and prosecution services and election security.
I'd put prosecution services before public defense myself, but
Yeah,
swap those around, I think it'd read better.
I think you're right, I think.
Because one follows the other in reality.
We can all, John's not here, but the rest of all of us that are here can feel like we can speak with a lot
I
of
would like to add
enthusiasm.
one
to
other
this.
thing for clarification, and where you say 0.2% or whatever, I think it should clearly say 0.2%, so that it does not confuse those voters that glance at it and think it's gonna be 2%. So if it's a 0.2%.
I agree.
spell it
Clear
out.
it's a
0.2%.
fraction.
Yeah.
Yeah, 0.2 also looks pretty low.
Yeah, 0.2% is, it is, like, you know, there, I mean-
We're limited to the number of words, right?
you're right.
So we need to make sure it fits within the number of words.
Your suggestion is actually be 0.2%, which is.
Well,
Or
which
if
is.
that doesn't
and-
fit, then
and you
make sure
could
you have
put-
the zero.
You could put in parentheses, 0.02, 0.2%. I don't know why we
That's
can't
yet
elaborate
another-
a little bit on the explanation.
Because we're
You can also
limited
put
to
it
the
in-
number of words.
Explanatory or the voter pamphlet statement. I mean, there are,
And the
Places you can
pamphlet would
explain.
probably explain that.
That's right.
But I think this is
I
0.2%.
Carefully.
think you're.
What I
Spell it
can
out in
probably
the
do is
resolution.
add a 0 in front of it,
Mhm.
as opposed to 0.2, is 0.2%.
Maybe.
Two zeros.
Something to clarify as much as you can.
Right. I would like to, I would be remiss if I did not clarify that this money can be used for supplanting. Under the state law, there's nothing that prohibits that.
Right, but I think is the intent of the board is not to get to that
I
point.
understand that. I'm just making sure that they understand that it could be at their discretion.
Boy, if it's supplanting, I don't think that's good to have supplanting in there.
It
No, we
doesn't
don't have it.
say
We don't have nothing related
able
to
to
supplanting
supplant.
here.
it's silent on
What
supplanting.
Robin.
What does the
is-
RCW say?
that you have that option.
I would ask that it does not supplant. I know that my chief of finance is going to say the same thing, that the sheriff's office, we've already had this conversation. She said that if there isn't any language in there that says that this cannot be supplanted, don't support it. So
They will or
that we
won't?
won't.
Yeah, I think it has to
Our
say,
biggest concern, right, is that
no
at any point in
supplanting,
time, then
so.
the money could be reallocated,
right.
or supplanted basically through our existing
Supplanting,
funding.
if you don't put it in there, we're asking the public to trust us and they don't trust us. And I think it needs to be
I just got
spelled out, no
the text from her
supplanting.
that says absolutely not, so.
So we'll add on the whereas no supplanting. Is that,
I think it needs to be in there.
and I'll probably like to have a whereas determined to election security. Don't include any building, any facilities, just what election security, maybe a couple of whereases.
High
in-
level.
High level, don't get into the details. And if you have any other typographical revisions to this resolution, please let me know.
Yeah, and I don't want the percentages for the prosecution and public defense. I think that should be up to the board. How we decide.
You divvy up that
How we
25%.
divvy out that,
And
yes.
that's what it states in here.
Yep.
And that's pretty easy to tell the public when you're talking at the Rotary Club or whatever it is, that 75% is dedicated with no supplanting. 25% is going to go towards prosecution, election defense,
And election security.
Public defense.
public defense, whatever we finally decide.
Madam Chair, I think in this proposal, you're not bound to a specific percent. You have the flexibility as to how you do that.
Patrick?
25%.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I would just recommend that the supplanting language include and encompass public defense.
Yeah, I don't have any,
I think we just leave it general, Patrick. We don't need to get the level of detail of supplanting what areas. I think
Well, if it's gonna be specific to the sheriff's office, my community that supports what we do is gonna ask the
No,
same
they-
question
no.
to me.
Hey, Patrick, the supplanting whereas is gonna be general
Okay, thank you.
to the proposition.
Do we have more time or are we out of time?
Until 3:30.
3:30.
10 minutes,
I mean, I just have some other like line edits that might be.
Yep, I'll take those.
Just one of them might be like for, not for a general conversation. I just want to know if, because this sheriff brought this up at the beginning about whether or not this proposition language would be confusing to the voter. Not, well, whether it would be confusing.
oh,
The thing about the cities is what I'm getting at, and it's not confusing as written, but it could be deemed deceptive because it's saying that this proposition would authorize to be used for 75% law enforcement protection, but that's only the county's portion. So I'm wondering, would it be appropriate to say something like, to be used by the county for up to 75% or something, so that we're not being accused
Okay, I see
of,
what you're saying. Clarify the county.
because 75% of what we're getting is gonna be used for that, but not of what the public's paying. And just so that, I don't wanna get more detailed than that, because then it would be confusing,
So-
but I also don't wanna be confused of.
So
who in the
maybe
world
add
are
in there
people's
for the
eyes.
county's distribution to be used exclusively.
Yeah, either 0.2% of the county's portion or distribution, or to be used by the county, either, I came up with two different alternates, but one of those two, I think we should throw in there. It wouldn't confuse things more than.
Yeah, okay,
I'll add any other edits, please send it my way.
okay.
You too, Sheriff.
Yeah, I guess I just had a real quick general question, is there any, again, a big issue that we're having at the sheriff's right now is structure and space. And so is this going to prevent us from using any of the vacancy savings that are generated over the next few years to say, hey, county commissioners, we have money to assist with the purchase of a new building?
Because we need to add to build infrastructure and that will,
Public safety infrastructure.
All of the money that's collected, this entire 75% would have to, the way it's written, would have to go to services.
How about to support services? And then you leave yourself open to be able to do what the sheriff wants.
I'm just asking, because in theory, right,
This
5 years
is-
from now, there's $10 million sitting in the bank account. And we're saying we're still at a fob on a year-to-year basis because there's no money, but we have this 10 million to go purchase a facility that is owned by the county then, and that we have our home as the sheriff's office. But this would prevent us from doing that.
so the voters are not voting on the whereases.
No, they're voting on this.
So this is what they're voting on. If you want to add infrastructure to this,
So no, while and I would turn to Elizabeth for legal advice, but the way I understand it is the ballot measure, you're bound to the ballot, the way it's written, but you're also bound by the resolution that adopts the ballot measure. So whatever all these whereases say is what we're bound to. And I saw Elizabeth nodding her
There you go.
head.
I have one more whereas issue. On whereas 7, I just wonder if whereas 7 even needs to be in there. Additional funding is necessary to increase, because I think it's in 6, it kind of says that.
So couldn't, oh, sorry,
That's
I was thinking out.
so and that was my addition to this. I'm on the many, because the public can respond, can resonate response time. Because as a result, you're gonna increase the response time.
Well, we don't want to increase response time, we want to decrease,
yeah.
but we don't want to make it look like we're getting rid of deputies, so it's word schematics here a little bit, so that's all.
Or maybe improve. the response time.
Improve response time.
Improve, yeah,
There you go. Yeah,
To improve, yeah.
okay, then that reads better too.
So,
Thank you.
going back to the sheriff's point, I mean, where it says, Commissioner Edwards to increase the number of sheriff's deputy, sheriff's office, law enforcement services, and public safety infrastructure, I don't know, sheriff's infrastructure, something along those lines to kind of,
I put an additional law enforcement service kind of to cover,
yeah.
so we buy a radio, patrol car, whatever it takes. But I don't know.
But then, he's talking about, thank you.
Maybe if we can probably find a way to say, and supporting infrastructure.
Something along those lines, and maybe it never comes to fruition, but I would hate to get to a point where in 6 years, there's $10 million sitting in that bank. Our facility is still falling apart. There's no money in the general fund, we're not going out for a bond, and we have this money that's tied up in an account that.
That was the entire reason that we were saying, take that first year money and it could go toward the ballot center. Because you're not gonna be able to use it in the first year, and it's just going to pile up in this special fund. So it would have been really easy to take the first year revenue, pay for the ballot center while you're staffing up, and then we'd be done with that, and all the money would have gone toward the sheriff and public defense and the prosecutor.
But that would have been complicated to write, wouldn't it?
It would have, no, I don't think so, but I don't think that there's support for that particular, so you know,
I
I
understand
didn't
what you're
push it
saying,
forward.
but I just felt like any way of describing that would complicate things for the public.
So,
And I understand that she needs a ballot processing center, but I also need a police station of some
You
sort.
do.
So that's where,
So we
that's where
gotta
I'm like,
figure out how to
that,
write this.
that 5 million could also be used to generate towards
Once-
the law enforcement entity that it was initially paid for.
Sure. Once you put in public safety infrastructure, the law defines public safety extremely broadly. We could use that money toward the courthouse. So, and that's what you need, but
That's why we don't wanna
It'd
have
be broad.
no supplanting.
I mean, the more you put in here,
the more,
the more,
so whereas number 6, I think is key to address a lot of.
Yeah.
And it
so
reads,
we need to wordsmith that.
whereas additional funding is necessary to increase the number of sheriff deputies in the sheriff's office, law enforcement services, Portsmouth this, law enforcement services and associated infrastructure. And then move on, and I think that probably may.
I have to excuse myself, guys, 3:30 Zoom. So thank you.
So what I will do, I develop a clean copy, I'm gonna circulate in the next week or so for final review to the key stakeholders. And I will have an AIS for the board to take an action on July 18th. Rob will carry the water on this one on July 18th. Because I will not be here.
And I'm gonna defer to the sheriff's okay or not, just in case
Yeah, I'm,
we don't have another meeting.
No, this will be done via email. And I
Yeah,
will,
okay, just in case.
Okay, it's 3:30, we are adjourned.